but it would make no sense. It would be without meaning, as if you described a Beethoven symphony as a variation of wave pressure. Can you imagine trying to do that? Describe symphony? It's just waves. That's all it is. We can't always think scientifically. Albert Einstein also said, before God, we are all equally wise and equally foolish. And my favorite quote of the morning is, there are only two ways to live your life. One is though nothing is a miracle, and the other as if everything is a miracle. Pastor Mike has been talking about faith and science the last few weeks, and so I'm just going to kind of take my 2 cents on what he has been talking about. If anybody was here last week, okay, all right, I'm going to do my thing, my pendulum swing. We're going to talk about the pendulum swing a little bit, because if you were here last week, Pastor Mike had described himself as being very eccentric. Is that a good word? Swingy? I don't know. He tends to go quite far in either direction. The pendulum swings, and it's your emotions, it's your actions, and his is quite wide. We do agree it's from one side to the other. And yes, you guys got me. I really am a little smaller in my pendulum swing. But we're going to look at two men in the Bible today who also had very different ways of looking at life, and their pendulum swings were very different as well. The first person we're going to look at is Peter. Now, if you've done any research on Peter, if you've read the New Testament at all, you hear a lot about Peter. And Peter was the one, man, he was always getting himself into trouble. His swing was large. He was quick to speak. He was quick to act. I don't think he engaged sometimes the brain before he did his actions. Okay, he cut the ear off the soldier when he came to take Jesus. He rebuked Jesus for talking about dying on the cross. Okay, Peter he was kind of a trouble when he got his mouth going. And then he insisted too that he would not deny Christ. So he was way up here on his pendulum swing. I will not deny Christ. I'm all for you. And then the next day, where is he? He's over here, denying Christ 3 times. Feeling in the pit of despair. He goes from, I will not deny you, to, I didn't know him. That's a huge pendulum swing. But I look at, okay, Peter had these major swings of what he did. But there was one time that I find that Peter kind of held it together. And he waited. So if you have your Bibles, if you want to turn to Matthew 14, we are going to look at verses 22 through 33. And if you remember this story, this has been, a lot of things have been going on. Jesus had, he had been feeding, he fed the 5,000 people, and he had gone out because he was tired. Jesus had been ministering, he had done all this stuff, and he needed to get away. So in verse 22, it picks up in Matthew 14. It said, immediately Jesus, listen to this, he made the disciples get into the boat. Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed him, he went up to the mountain and he prayed. And when evening came, he was there alone. And by then the boat was already quite a distance away from the shore. And it was being buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. So this is a night, it's probably not a great night. We just started boating a few years ago, and if there's anything more than a wave this big, I don't want to go in the boat because I don't like that feeling. But can you imagine here they're out and the waves are buffeting, the boat. So it's probably not a really nice, calm, peaceful night. Maybe it's cloudy, maybe it's storming. We just know that at that moment when Jesus starts this process, the waves are beating against it. So during the 4th watch of the night, because this is in the middle of the night. So it was dark, it was dreary, it was windy. It was the 4th hour of the night. Jesus went to them, just walking out on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to him, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. And then listen to what Peter says. He says, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water. Now we're going to stop right there. Of all the times that Peter was rash and irrational, you almost think he would say, cool, and jump in. But you notice what he did? In that moment he said, if it's you, tell me, or the King James says, command me to come out on the water. It's kind of cool when you think about it. He actually managed to keep his mind in check for that moment. And then, of course, Jesus said, come, and Peter got on the boat, and he walked on the water, and he came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and he began to sink. And he cried out, Jesus, Lord, save me. And then the story goes on from that. So I look at, that's Peter. He's kind of from one end to the other, and in his normal. But on this one occasion, he did kind of stay balanced. He stayed kind of balanced in his swing. And the other person we're going to look at is Job. Job has an entire book to himself. It's back in the Old Testament. In your Pew Bible, it's actually on page, 359. It's kind of in the middle of the Old Testament. Esther and then Job. And Job, I like Job. He kind of has my same personality. He just doesn't go very far with his emotions. Well, when he does when he gets sad, but for the most part, he kind of lets things, oh, well, my family just is destroyed. What will be, will be. He's just kind of cool that way. I love that about Job. Does everybody know the story about Job? Everybody read it? Quick brief, okay? We're going to look, okay. The prologue of Job is God's hanging around, and first of all, he was a good guy. He had everything. He was blameless and upright. He feared God, shunned evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. He had tons of stuff, right? He was living large. He had a really good life. One day, the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with him. And the Lord said to Satan, where have you come from? Satan answered the Lord, from roaming through the earth and going back and forth in it. Then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? God brought this up. You notice that? Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. So of course, what's Satan going to do? Does Job fear God for nothing? Satan replied, have you not put the hedge around him and his flock and his household and everything he has? So basically it says, well, yeah, sure, Job has nothing. He loves you and doesn't fear anything because you've put a hedge of protection around him. You've put that hedge around him. So he's, of course, going to love you. You bless the work of his hands. Life is easy for him. But in verse 11, Satan says to God, but stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse to your face. The Lord said to Satan, very well then, everything he has, notice, God's not doing it, but he said, everything he has is in your hands. But on the man himself, do not lay a finger. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord,